Boker Tov. Today's daf, Shavua Tov. Today's daf is daf Yud Tes in Baba Basra, as we learn for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Sunnah Shivya. Referring back to the Mishnah that we had the other day on Yud Zion, Mishnah said that you have to keep shouldn't dig a bore next to somebody else's pit, and nor a ditch or a cave, and nor water, a channel water, and nor a cleaning pool, or like a washing pool. They used to have like a big basin that they would wash the clothes in. Now there were two basins, as we'll see. The first basin was where they soaked it. They soaked it either in animal dung or some heavy-duty soap, like borax or something, heavy use. They'd soak it in there till it really stunk. And then they would put it into cleaner water that washed it and shake it around and soak it. It's not soaking it anymore, not really cleaning it out, rubbing it, etc. So it says you shouldn't put a this kind of a washing pool next to somebody else's bore, because the water can affect it and can ruin it. So from the top of the page, the second one, this that we say that it's enough to keep three. How far away do you have to keep? You have to keep 3 tefachim away. Is if it's from the soaking pool, the soaking bath of water that you soak the clothes in. That's the one that you wash it. Now, when you wash it, you're shaking the water around more. The soaking, you just leave it in there. But when you shake it around in the washing pool that you put in afterwards, daled amos, you have to keep 4 amos away, because the water splashes and could do more damage. So if you're putting this kind of a washing basin near somebody's bore, it's got to be 4 tefachim away. So that's what Rav Nachman said. Now we have a brisa confirming what he said. The Bechzakobs and daled amos. If you have this washing pool, it's got to be 4 amos away. I've an antran gimel tefachim. And our Mishnah, we learn only 3 tefachim. Allah Shema must be like Rav Nachman is right, that Rav Nachman said the Mishnah is only talking about the soaking pool, but not the one where you shake the water around, where you rub the clothes, etc., and you splash more. It's got to be 4 tefachim away. Again, I remember some learned it not as a kasha, not that Rav Nachman said it, and we had a brisa say confirming what he said, and our Mishnah said otherwise, but it was actually a kasha was asked from the Mishnah and the brisa. We can Rav Meir some asked as kasha Tanan. Our Mishnah says the brachas kofs and gimel tefachim. You got to give 3 tefachim away from the guy's bore. Tanya Abba must we learn has to be 4 amos, not even 4 tefachim, 4 amos away. It's not a question of 1 tefach. The splashing could be far away, so you have to keep away 4 amos. Rav Nachman said it to resolve the conflict between the Mishnah and the brisa. Lo kasha kan mira machamsan, from the soaking one. The soaking one 3 tefachim away is good enough. And the other one is that I say 3 tefachim or 3 amos. Yeah, 3 tefachim. The Mishnah says, right? 3 tefachim, and 3 tefachim versus 4 amos is a big difference. So he says, "Lokasha kamen achamsan kamen adai." And if it's from machamsan, from the soaking one, 3 tefachim away is enough. From the one where you splash the water around, where you're actually washing it out, you have to keep away 4 tefachim. Rav Chia bereid Rav Abi Masal Behedi. He said it beferish that the Mishnah said Eliam Cain hirchik misvas machamsan l'kos gam tefachim. The Mishnah said, not in the brachas and stam, but rather from the soaking pool 3 tefachim, which indicates that the regular pool where you wash it and rub the clothes and splash around, that's not what we're talking about in the Mishnah. That really needs 4 amos. Besad besid. Now, if you look at the Mishnah, the first part of the Mishnah says how far you have to keep away from the kosel of the bore. Said 3 tefachim. Besad besid, and line it with cement. And then when it says you stay away from the wall, also if you keep away from somebody's wall, 3 tefachim. Then the Mishnah said, "Osad besid." In our gifts of the Mishnah, there's a parentheses there, but the little dalet, the Masoras Hashah says that, as he says, Nirvana Bisad, and some say Osad besid. So the different gears is there. But the first part of the Mishnah, then talking about just keeping away from the board, talking about Bisad besid. So what's the gears in the first part of the Mishnah? So here he says, did the first part of the Mishnah mean Bisad, and notice you have to keep your distance and line it with cement? Or it maybe means either or. Either keep 3 tefachim away or line it with cement. Which one is it? That's like actually is it and or is it or? So Pshita the Must be, the Gemara says, that it means and you must cement it. not just to keep it away, but answer it. These if he means either or. So why didn't the Mishnah, when the Mishnah says stay away, if you're digging a bore, you have to stay away from somebody else's bore, or if you're digging a ditch or anything else, or a channel of water, or a washer's basin, all that stuff, you have to stay away from Tvachim. And if it's Osad Besid, then why did you have to say, why didn't you just say also continue on with the middle part of the Mishnah, and you have to stay away from somebody's wall, keep these things away, keep olive refuse and dung and salt and all that stuff, stay away. And there it says Osad Besid. So if they're both Osad Besid, why don't you just put it all together? So that Elamai, since he didn't put it together, must be the first part is Visad Besid. The first part of the Mishnah is and you must do it, keep away, and the second part about staying away from the wall is or. That's why he didn't put it together, because one's and, one's or. No. Maybe the truth is that they're both o. We don't know for sure. The reason why they don't put it together is because there are two different kinds of damaging. The first part is a damage that comes via moisture, water. That's what we're talking about. Digging a ditch or a bore or a cave or a channel of water or a washer's basin. All those things is because the water is doing the damage, the moisture. And the second part, it's because the heat or the steam that's generated by the dung or the salt or the cement or the flintstones. They were talking about two different things. That's why the Mishnah was separated them. The low dummy Gemara says low dummy high zek high zek ratio zek the batunta safe as zek havla. The first part of the Mishnah is talking about damage done by moisture or water. The second part is damage done via heat or steam. Tashma. So let's try to prove from here. Our question. If you have rock which crumbles, comes apart, zechel for boro michan. If that's the kind of earth that we're dealing with, all kinds of earth. There's dry earth, there's virgin earth, there's there's rock. If you have earth that crumbles apart in your hand, so what do you do to make sure that one person's board doesn't damage the other one? Zechel for boro mikan. Each one can dig his pit on either side of his property, each one on his property. Each one, this one keeps 3 tvachim, visad bisid, and he cements it. Here you see that when it's crumbly earth, you must do both. You must keep your distance and put cement there. Time it above the dime. The reason must be here because it says we're talking about crumbling earth. Hello, but if it's normal earth that doesn't crumble, well, maybe you don't have to. So that would indicate that it's osad bisid, that it doesn't have to be both. Gemara says, no, you can't prove it. It could be that our Mishnah is the way we read it, that it means you have to keep distance and you have to cement it. Maybe that's what it means. So why does he tell you the chiddush of Babi Yadayim? The chiddush is when it crumbles, keep it since it crumbles, you have to keep more than 3 tvachim. Mashwan 3 tvachim is good enough, but you must also cement it. So therefore, you can't prove from here that in a case where it doesn't crumble, that it's osad b'sid. It could be in both cases that it's sad b'sid. And the pashut pshat in our Mishnah is that it's visad b'sid. That's how our Mishnah reads. The gears that we have is visad b'sid in the first part. On the second part, it can be osad b'sid. Right. Now the Mishnah said, and keeping away from a wall, not from a bore. If somebody has a wall there, you must keep away from his wall. Obviously, his wall is in his property, but you must keep away all kinds of things that could damage the wall. They could make it unstable or even crumble it. What do you keep away? So we said keep away olive refuse and dung and salt and what was the next one? And cement and sloim and these kinds of rocks, or like rocks that have heat, like flintstones. It's not awesome. We learned in Shabbos, Masechet Shabbos. It's a beautiful thing about learning the Daf. You get all kinds of stuff. You stuff about Shabbos, stuff about here. Go from one to the other. It's not awesome. Hamed Tamim Ma Ein Tamim. And this, I think, it's the 5th parak in Shabbos. I forget exactly, but it's in the beginning of that parak. It says, "And what are you? You're not allowed to cook on Shabbos. We know you're allowed to cook on Friday, and prepare it, and then keep it warm. Right? You're allowed to keep it warm on Shabbos. You can't add heat to it, but you can keep it hot. And what are you allowed to store food on Friday before coming into Shabbos that'll keep it hot? And what things are you not allowed to? So the key idea is that you're allowed to store food to keep it hot in things which maintain the heat, but you can't add heat to it. You can't make it add more heat to it. So what does he say? Ain't atonement. So these are similar things, just like we said in a totally unrelated thing. Our mission is talking about don't put these kind of items next to somebody's wall because they will detract from the stability of the wall. They will cause it to deteriorate because they heat it up. Same thing on Shabbos, we find that you can't store food on Erev Shabbos going into Shabbos in items that are going to add heat because that's cooking on Shabbos. So so similar things. Can't use olive refuse, not dung, lo melech, not salt, lo basid, not with cement, below bechol. Now, or sand. Whether it's dry, whether it's moist or dry. Okay, whether it's moist or dry, you can't store any of these things. Now, there's a difference here. In the mention, we mentioned 5 things here, and Shabbos we mentioned 5 things. However, the last item mentioned here was rocks, flintstones. There, the last thing mentioned is salt. So the Gemara says, what's the difference? Why, when you mention all these things that add heat, whether it's adding heat and therefore you can't store it on Shabbos in those things, or heat which is going to cause your neighbor's wall to break down, why is the 5th item here when it comes to the wall, you put flintstones, and there the 5th item is sand? Why over here you talk about stones? You didn't mention sand. And over there you mentioned sand. Like, what's the difference? Why over here do you mention rocks as the 5th item, and the other 5th item is sand? Because people don't usually store their food in rocks. We'll see, it's not convenient, or it can cause damage. So you usually do that. Is it normal for people to store stuff in sheep, wool, fleece, and fleece? Argument also that's already dyed and treated wool. Do people do there? Is that where normally people store food in there? The Tanya Somnan Begizei Summer, you're allowed to store it in fleece. If it's Sipei Summer, that's also the same thing as fleece that's been combed. And purple tongues of, that means woolen tongues that have been processed, or fluff, that fluff from an old garment, an old woolen garment, as they comb it out, you get the little fluff coming out of it. You're allowed to do that. But it's muksa. Those things are muksas, therefore you shouldn't move them. But the point is, it's not normal to do that, and yet we list that too. So you don't only list things which are normal. Elam Rabaya, Yagal Abreo. The truth is, over here, yes, here we mention rocks or stones, flintstones, and there we mention but they both apply. Yagal Abreo, the neighbor tells upon him. Here we mention rocks, the same things, rocks or sand. There we mention sand, but both applies to both. You can't go by what's normal. If that would be the case, if you just say, well, you can tell from its neighbor, it's a similar thing, right? So if here it's rocks and it means sand too, and there it's sand and it means rocks too. But if that would be the case, list all of them, rocks and sand in one of them. In other words, if you would say rocks and sand over here, and over there you just list sand, so you'll know rocks also, right? But it's saying one in one case and the other and another one in another case, and not listing them both in one place doesn't work. So if that would be, if it's Yagal Reo, listen to Kul B'chada, they should all mention all 6, including sand and rocks in one of them, and then list sand or rocks by the other one, and we'll know if you mention sand, it means rocks too, because they go together. That can't be the reason. The reason why in Shabbos we don't mention flintstones, the reason mention rocks doesn't mention rocks there, they'll crack the pot. Notice if you put a hot pot on stones, the stones may crack it, may ruin the pot. The reason why we didn't mention sand over here, what sand does is it makes something that's hot, it makes it hotter, and something that's cold, it makes it colder. Sand has that characteristic. It makes something hot hotter, makes something cold colder. So in Shabbos you can't mention sand. Why? Because it will make it hotter. You can't do that. You can't make. I mean, on Shabbos Daf, you do mention sand. You can't mention it, right? Because it's going to make it hotter. But over here, sand wouldn't be a problem over here. Why? Because it's not going to add heat. In other words, the problem over here is we mentioned the things mentioned in our Mishnah, like dung or cement or rocks, these rocks, or olive refuse. Those things add heat. But sand over here in a cold environment will not add heat. So therefore, sand is not applicable here, and rocks are not applicable in Shabbos because they will ruin the pot. I have a ton of Rav Oshia. Rav Oshia in his brisa about our Mishnah, he did say chol, he did mention chol. Also, there he's talking about moist, let's say moist sand. Or the issue, the whole thing was moist over there. Moist stuff, it would be forbidden because moist is going to damage it. If it's moist, it's going to damage it because of the moisture. So turning down Nami listen. So why does our Mishnah also mention chol? And to look at to say if it's moist, moist stuff is going to ruin things. So Tanalei Samayim. In the first part of the Mishnah, when we talk about don't put your bore or any other these items next to somebody else's bore, there we already mentioned a water channel. We already mentioned moisture as doing a damage. We said the first part of the Mishnah talks about moisture doing damage, water and moisture. The second part talks about heat or steam causing the damage. So Tanalei Samayim. Well, you say once you mention moisture, you're not going to mention it twice. The first part of the Mishnah, the third line of the Mishnah says you can't put a channel of water next to somebody's bore, even if it's those in your property, nor a washer's basin. Well, they're both because of water. So you mentioned both of those. So why can't you mention also wet sand? There you need both of them. Why? If you tell me a channel of water, because if you make a channel of water, that's a fixed thing. That's really going to cause damage to somebody else's bore because you always have water running there. A washer's basin is not a permanent fixture. He may move it someplace else. Or Rashi says it's normal to change that. Today he's a washer. Tomorrow he's a he's a puncher macher. He's doing something else. He can switch his job. It's not a permanent thing. So you might say that that's okay to move in there. So the Mishnah tells you both. Because the water, the base of the water is stagnant. It stays in one place, and that can cause more damage. But if you have a channel of water where the water is running down it, you might say that doesn't damage the water. Mashman, you need both. Therefore, you need both. But so it comes out that why isn't sand mentioned in our Mishnah? Sand is not mentioned because sand is not necessarily going to damage the wall. Because if it's cool, it's cold. You tell me it's wet. Well, we already mentioned wet items. Over there, we don't mention. Over there in Shabbos, we say over there we mention chol and not rocks because chol can add heat, just like the other items can add heat. They can't add heat on Shabbos, whereas rocks are not mentioned because the rocks people don't put their cookware, their pots and pans, etc., in a place of rocks because the rock can crack the vessels. Now, the next part of the Mishnah said, it's actually the last part of the Mishnah, if you count it as 1, 2, 3. You leave seeds. You keep seeds if you're planting. That's a machresha, means the plow furrow, not the plow or not the machine, the plow, but rather the furrow that when you plow, you should keep that furrow away from right, and also you keep away from the wall. What do you keep away? Seeds, because seeds can cause damage. You keep away the plow furrow, meaning don't furrow there. Now the Gemara is going to say, well, why would you plow there? Isn't it also because of seeds? So isn't it about the same thing? It's maybe that's urine. You have to keep urine away from the wall. 3 tefachim. Okay. Then we talked about you keep away your appliances. Let's say your mill and your oven. That was the last part of the mission. This part of the mission is talking about keeping away seeds, the plowing, and urine from somebody else's wall by 3 tefachim. So the Gemara says like this: we're 3 lines from the bottom of your Testament Aleph. Zroim, why do you talk about seeds? Why do you say you keep away seeds? When you plowed, you said you got to keep away the plow furrow, the line of the plow 3 tefachim away. Well, why would you plow except to plant seeds? So once you say that you have to keep away the plow furrow, obviously you have to keep away the seeds. The answer is no. Sometimes you seed not with a machine, not by with a furrow, not by plowing it first, but sometimes you just throw some loose by hand. A polisiad means do it by hand. So he's telling you can't do that either. Even if you don't plow it first, you just throw the seeds on the ground and put some water on it. That's good. That's also a way of sowing, a way of seeding, and therefore Therefore, he tells you both. You can't put seeds even with no plow or with a plow. So again, machresha, you can't plow there. The table is wrong. When you're plowing, when you plow, it's because you're going to plant seeds there. So isn't it obvious then that it's obvious that if you're going to plow, there's going to be seeds. So just mention the plowing. Don't plow there, because if you're going to plow, obviously you have seeds. Therefore, it's speaking about when there's no seeds. For example, when you plow around your tree in order to help it grow. So the table is Shumaya. So if you're talking about plowing around the tree, well, why don't you say over there, because you're going to add water. And water is also injurious, as we saw at the beginning of the Mishnah. Water is injurious to somebody else's bore, and anything that's wet like that kind of is going to damage the bore and presumably damage his wall as well. So again, the first part of the Mishnah talked about moisture damage. Second part talked about heat. But if you're saying that you're talking about you shouldn't plant or plow near there, well, why don't you say because you're going to add water? If you add plants, you're going to have water. Water's going to be damaged. Tana Beretz Yisrael, Tana speaking about in Eretz Yisrael, as the Mishnayos were all written in Eretz Yisrael. That's why they're in Hebrew, not in Aramaic. The Chassid says when Tara Shemaim Tishnamayim, it says by the Eretz Yisrael will drink water by the rain. In other words, the rain will supply it. So maybe he's not adding water over here. He's not adding water. It's not his problem. He's not adding water to ruin the guy's wall. He's only seeding or plowing. So the plowing might be without seeding, and the seeding might be without plowing. Says Gemara, okay, the Meimer destroying with student point. I understand. So what if I plant my seeds within 3 tefachim of his wall? Of course, again, his walls are his property. My seeds are my property. But what's the problem? When I put the seeds in the ground, the stuff's going to go straight up, isn't it? What do you mean? If I put the seeds in, it's going to go on the sides? Maybe it's student point. Are you telling me, Chashi, that it grows roots, that the roots of the seeds go on off to the sides? But the time we learned, let's say you want to bend over you have a single vine and you want to make 2 out of it. You bend it over into the ground. If there's no dirt on top of 3 tefachim now, 3 tefachim dirt, you shouldn't plant grain seeds there because you'll have client, right? You're talking about a vine. It's not a regular vineyard. Rashi explains, you're talking about one vine. Because if it's a vineyard has to have 5 vines, 2, and 1 in the tail, then it's usher anyway, right? We're just talking about here, you have 1 vine, and you don't want the seed to mix and to draw nourishment from the vine. That's a problem of client. So it says over there, if you're making 1 vine, you turn it over, you got to make sure there's at least 3 tefachim of dirt on top. If not, you can't put any seeds there. The Tanya law, Avalzareya Esat Studden, says over there you could plant on the sides, right? Eilach be'eilach on either side. You can't plant it, you have to have dirt on top of there in order. If you put this there, and you have to have dirt on top of 3 tefachim, otherwise the grains will mix with the vine, unless you plant the seeds on the side. If you plant them on the sides, presumably the stuff's going to go straight up. It's like you're doing it on the sides. If you don't do it right next to each other or on top of it, you're not doing it on top, you're doing it on the sides. Mashma that the seeds grow straight up. Not going to mix. If I have a vine here, a single vine here, and I put some seeds on either side, it's not a problem because they're not going to mix. Because here's the problem. The truth is it's not going to go on the sides. The seeds, if I plant seeds near a wall, seeds will go straight up. The problem is that the seeds will break up the earth, right? Will break up the earth, and will bring up loose earth. In other words, it's going to destabilize, let's say, the solid earth there. If you have a wall, the other guy's got a wall on his boundary, and there's solid earth of 3 tefachim next to it in your property. If you plant seeds there, it's not that the seeds are going to grow into the, not talking about a tree, you're talking about seeds, seeds that grow grain. So the seeds are not going to grow into the wall. The problem is that the seeds will ruin the solidness of the earth. It's going to break up the earth and turn it into loose earth. You can't place urine within a wall of 3 tefachim, okay? Because urine also destabilizes the earth, will destabilize the wall. Chana says an interesting thing. He says, this applies especially in Eretz Yisrael, where taxi drivers are always standing on the side of the road. Are you allowed to urinate on somebody else's wall? So Rabbi Chana says you're allowed to. Rabbi says you're allowed to. Now don't take this as the halacha, boys. Wait till we see. He says you're allowed to basically to pee on somebody else's wall. The pasuk says, I'm going to cut off Machav. Hashem said, Mashim Bekir. Anybody like he's trying to say all kinds of people and animals. Anybody who urinates on a wall, also anybody like stopped up or forsaken. Anybody who's any Jew, like all Jews, anybody, even an average guy who just pees on the wall, and people who are forsaken, I'm going to cut them all off. So he says, you see over here that people urinate on walls. Our Mishnah says you have to keep urine away from the wall 3 tefachim. So how could he say that you can that you can urinate next to somebody's wall? Obviously, from our Mishnah, you see that urine will ruin somebody's wall. The Gemara says, no, Hassan B'Shal, from there, the Mishnah is speaking about not a single person urinating. You're talking when you take a whole, let's say a chamber pot and pour, take a pail of urine and pour that next to the wall. That's going to destabilize the wall. But a single person doing it, maybe not so much. Wait till let me see the next case. Tashma, another proof. Lo yashtin or lo yatel mayim adam. But one person should not urinate mayim. Person should not urinate bitzad kosesh chaver next to the wall of somebody else's. Elim kedich melegim l'tfachim. Here the Bryce says clearly, we're not talking about. Our Mishnah said don't put urine next to the wall. Not talking about urinating. He's talking about putting urine next to the wall. So that you could say, they're talking about taking a pail of urine. Here he says you shouldn't pee next to somebody else's wall, unless you teach up away. Bedmore Morim goes on to say, when we talk about a wall, because they're made out of brick, of a coastal of if it's made out of stone, you have to keep it away enough not to do damage. How much is that? Tefach. As long as it's 1 tefach away, that's good enough. The sheltsuma, if it's 1 big solid rock, then mutter, you're allowed to be right next to it because it's not going to do any damage. Well, urinating is not going to do damage of a big solid rock. But what do you see over here? By a brick wall, you can't urinate. A single person cannot urinate within 3 tefachim of the brick wall. Chana said you're allowed to pee next to somebody's brick wall. No, you may not. You may not. Now, maybe you'll say Rav Chana was talking about also a stone wall where you only need 1 tefach away, or a tsunma, a large, big rock, a gigantic rock where it doesn't do any damage. Then you should have said that. Tosafos says you can't say that he's speaking about a tsunma. Number 1, because he should have said so. Well, Darshmish Mashmi, he learned out of a pasuk. The pasuk says, based on the pasuk, anybody who that I'm going to cut off all people, your average guy who, the taxi drivers, everybody who pees next to the wall, I'm going to kill them all. So it's mashma is based on a pasuk. The pasuk's not talking about Bekir, a wall. A wall could be a brick wall. The Gemara says, yes, Gashar Chana, he brought down a pasuk. How can you have a kash on him? He brought down this pasuk from Nach that said that I'm going to cut off all the people who peed on the wall. It says we presumably meant all individuals. This is what the meaning of the pasuk was. Even a person, or even let's say an animal, a being, which is normal for him to pee on the wall. Human beings should not pee on a wall, but who pees next to a wall? A dog. Even him, lo shavik, I will not leave him alive either. I will not save him. Kalba. A dog pees next to the wall. Or they didn't have tires in those days for the car tires. So before they invented car tires, the dog would pee on the wall. Now they have car tires instead, But normally in those days they do it next to the wall. So that's what he was talking about. He's talking about animals, not people. People are not allowed to pee, and so you can't pour a pail of water next to a wall unless you're 3 tefachim, nor should you pee next to his wall. Okay. I'm going to have to be back yesterday. Now the following Gemara is basically about Hilchas Tumas Mace. The only reason it's brought down is because we said in our Mishnah, and the king we just talked about before, not before the Urim, we talked about you shouldn't place seeds next to somebody's wall. the seeds can be injurious to the wall, right? Why? Because they break up the earth. So don't plant seeds next to the wall. They don't go into the wall necessarily. Not talking about planting a tree, we're talking about seeds, but they're injurious to the body. That's what we talk about in the Mishnah. Because of this, we're going to get into a whole topic of tumah, and eventually we'll come back to this idea of the zera, the seeds. What's the deal with them? And that's why we're going to talk about it now. What's the halach here? If you have a dead body in a room, so everybody in the room is tummy, everything in the room is tummy, right? Tumas OL. Let's say there's a window, an opening, and that goes into another room, right? And the window has what's called a poseh tefach, tall and a tefach wide. The tumah will go in there. It's just like an open window, a hole, call it what you will, an opening between one room and another. The tumah will go in there as well. That's the halach of tumah. Now, one way to you don't want tumah to go into the next room is to close that hole, make it smaller. Let's say you made it smaller with some food, right? Or if you filled it up with a rock or something that cement, of course, then you close it. Put some food there. What's the halacha? You might say, well, you made a mechitza there. It's called a mechitza, partition. But no, it's not a real partition if you're going to remove it, right? If it's food, it's more likely you're going to remove it. So here you have halacha like this. And again, this has nothing to do with our Gemara so far, but we're going to come back to the idea of the seeds. Keep that in the back of your mind. If you put a wafer there in that hole, the hole between the room that has the dead body and the other room, a wafer does not make the hole smaller. Meaning, if the hole was a tefach, a poseh tefach, and transmitted the tumah to the, let's call it from the primary room, the first room where the dead body is, into the second room, so that hole was the tumah was being transferred. So you want to make the hole smaller so that the tumah would not go into room number 2. You wanted to make more. You put a wafer there. That doesn't do it. That doesn't make the hole smaller. Lomamait means it doesn't make the hole smaller, and the tumah is being transferred. Gemara says, why talk about a wafer, which is a very thin, kind of a cookie? Afilu ovenami, even if it was a thick one. Also, why? Because presumably you're going to take it away. Wasn't if it's a wafer or it's like a thick bread? What's the difference? Or a donut or whatever? Says lo mi boy coming. No, it means for sure lo mi boy over. Certainly, if it's a thick one, the given there, since you could eat it, you're going to take it away. You left your sandwich there. That's not a mechitza. That's not a partition because you're going to take it away. So you don't leave it there permanently. Mavatla means I'm going to leave it there. It's bottle. It's part of the wall. Of a rocket, but a wafer, which can become very repulsive. It crumbles and gets mias. It gets repulsive. Of a rocket, the most. Maybe I'm like sitting on the wall there, a wafer. I'm not going to eat it now. I might think I'm just going to leave it there permanently, and therefore it should be part of the wall. Therefore, it should diminish the size of the hole, and therefore not transmit to room number 2. Kamashma, no. A wafer is also food, and you might take it away. I understand. Why do you say that doesn't diminish the size of the hole in the wall? Because you're going to remove it. You're not going to leave it there. I'll tell you a different reason why it doesn't diminish the size. Because it's makabel tumah. Food is makabel tumah. And anything which is makabel tumah cannot make a partition against tumah, right? You can't have a partition. If a person's makabel tumah or a kli, matechet, or some sort of a kli, it's makabel tumah, so it can't be a chatzitza. So say that the typically makabel tumah, since the food is makabel tumah, can accept tumah. Cannot be a partition against tumah. The answer is shenil shmei peiros. It's not makabel tumah. Why? Because it wasn't made with water. It was kneaded with mei peiros, with fruit juice, like made from fruits, apple juice or whatever. And what makes something makabel tumah normally? If it's a food, because it was mixed with water or wine or milk, things like that, which make it makabel tumah. But the food is not makabel tumah. So Shmuel says that food which you're going to remove from the hole, right, does not diminish the size of the hole. That's not part of the wall. It's a piece of food. You're going to take it away, even if it's a thin wafer. Maybe you'll eat it. You'll give it to a kid, give it to your dog, or something of that sort. That's what Shmuel said. Now we're going to ask a kasha on Shmuel. We still haven't come back to the seeds. Kupam le'at heaven. Let's say you have a box or a basket full of straw, or chavas malaya grogas, so you have a jar or a jug full of dried figs. They're put in this window, in this hole in the wall between room number 1, where there's a dead body, and room number 2. When you look at it this way, if you would remove the container, the basket, or the jug, whatever, you remove them and the food could stand there, then it's a chatzitza. That separates, that makes that's a good chatzitza, that's a good partition, and the truma doesn't get transferred. Now the Gemara is going to say, well, that's the kasha. Shmuel says food does not make a partition because you're going to remove it. So why over here wouldn't you remove it? He says if you would take away the receptacle, whether it's the jar or the basket or the box, and the food would remain there, that's when it was chatzitza. Yimlav, if the food would not be able to withstand, if you would take away the cover, the receptacle, then the food would fall away. Then it's not a chatzitza. Now, why isn't the receptacle a chatzitza? Because it's a kli, right? It's a kli. A kli is mikabel tuma. It's a mikabel tuma. It doesn't work. Okay, but tevin chazla b'hemto. But why do you said if you would remove the receptacle and the food would stay there, then it makes a good partition and we keep the tum away. Why? But you're going to take the food away and give it to your animal. The straw is good for the animal. We're talking about where it's rotten, it's moldy, the food is rotten. It's got rotted away. You're not going to give it to your animal. That's chazal tim, but you can use it for making cement. No, this bekotzi, it's got thorns in it, and it's got thorns. The way they would make cement is the way they made grapes. They made wine. They would trot on it with their feet. They would, step on it. So if it had thorns, you couldn't use it for making cement. Chazal, you use it for firewood. Use it for firewood, but it's wet. So in other words, we're talking about here straw, which is wet, thorny, and rotten. So you're not going to use it for food or for cement or for firewood. So chazal has to go. You can use it for a large bonfire. Even if it's wet. Like the kids take wet and make a big bonfire in like Bomer. Even if it's wet, if it's big fire, it'll work anyway. That's not normal. So the point is that if the receptacle is removed, the reason why the food here, this straw, remains and is a good chatzitz is because you're not going to take it away. You're not going to take it away. It's not fit for food. It's not fit for cement. It's not fit for anything. Okay, what about grogas? What about dried figs? They eat dried figs. Also, they got wormy. They got ruined. They got wormy, got moldy and rotten. So the Gemara says, okay, fine. So in this case, yes, the Kasha and Shmuel, here you see food is a chatzitza, does separate between tumah of one room and another one. The answer is that this food is not real food. You're not going to take it away because it's all ruined food. But let's look at the jar. You say the jar, the jug that the dried figs were in, right? You say if you would take that away, would the food stand and stay there? It would. Why wouldn't you take it away? Because it's rotten. It's not going to be good for anything. Okay, what about the jar itself? Why isn't that a chatzitza? Now, if we're talking about chavas, the Rambam chavas they talked about was not like our wooden casks or barrels. We're talking about an earthenware one. The earthenware one is only metame from the inside. So either pumalabar, if the mouth, the opening of it is on the outside, then this side of, let's say the body is in this room, and there's no opening in the jar in this, so that itself is a chatzitza because the tumah doesn't go from the outside when it comes to klicheres. Klicheres is only mitzvah from the inside. So he gufetachet. So if the opening is on the outside, meaning facing into room number 2, then that should the jug itself should be a chatzitza. There's klicheres. The klicheres and mitzvah gava does not mitzvah from the outside, from the back. Ella the pum lagav. The answer is the opening is on the inside, so the tumah could go in and transmit it. Maybe it's on the inside and it goes into the klicheres' opening is on the inside, facing the mess, room number 1, and therefore the tumah does go inside. Or maybe you're speaking about where it's on the outside. Maybe it's not an earthenware vessel, this receptacle, but rather it's made out of metal. Metal is makabel tumah. This makabel tumah cannot be a chatzitza and can't keep the tumah away. So that was one answer on Shmuel. So that was a kasha on Shmuel, and we answered it. Basically, another kasha on Shmuel. Again, Shmuel is saying that if you have food in the hole in the wall, that does not diminish the size, and it does not keep the tumah from going from room number 1 into room number 2. Why? Because it doesn't diminish the size, because you're going to take away that food. In the case that we just brought down from the tevin and the grogris, you were going to leave the food there because it had no good purpose. Meisvei, and you're mavatl it, you left it to remain permanently in the wall. Meisvei, asam shetoshin. Let's say, here we come to getting this wrong. You had grass or some sort of a vegetable that was plucked, that was removed from the ground. You put that in this hole in the wall between room number 1 and 2. Or it grew by itself, just grew up b'chalonos and fell into these holes. Or you had a rag, a small shmata, that didn't have 3 by 3. If it's 3 by 3, then it's a kli. But if it didn't have 3 by 3, or let's say you had a limb or some loose flesh that was hanging on to an animal. The animal got cut or something. It's got a little piece, and a piece of his one of his limbs, or a loose limb or loose flesh of an animal, a chaya or a bird, sheshachan b'chalon, that rested in the chalon, or sheshachan. They probably even the basim don't speak about behema ubachaya, right? Then it says ba'of sheshachan, or if a bird stayed in the window. All these things will be a chatzitza, we'll see. But ovid kachavim, or a goy. Goy is not tamei in Torah. Let's say goy was sitting in the window. That's also chatzitza. Uben shmon rachman sign, if somebody had a baby that was not going to survive. In those days, an 8-month baby couldn't survive. So if you knew it was an 8-month baby, an 8-month baby is like muktzah on Shabbos, is considered like dead, and you're going to leave it there. Hamurach b'chalon. You put those in the chalon. The hamelach. The klicheres, or you have salt, or an earthenware vessel where the tumah does not go, the opening isn't on the inside of the room with a mess, or sefer Torah, kulam and matan b'chalon. All these things serve as a chalitza, as a chatzitza. They all make the hole smaller. All these items we talked about, grass or a vegetable or something like that, growing in there, some sort of a green growth of an herb or whatever. They grew, and it was sitting in the chalon, or it grew by itself. All these other items that we say over here, all these things do serve as a chatzitza and keep them away. But shelik, snow, vabarad, hail, glid is ice, kifor is frost, v'mayim. All these things pulling out machalon because they're all going to melt. They're not going to be there long, right? They're not going to stay there. They're going to melt away. Okay. But all these, the first items mentioned, these all serve as a chatzitza. Now Shmuel said that food doesn't work as chatzitza. V'hasavin, what about grass? Chazulamta, the grass or the herbs or whatever grew over there. If it's sitting in the chalon, you say that's a chatzitza. What do you mean? It's fit for your animal. It's food. It's animal food. So you are going to remove it. According to Shmuel, something, if the food's going to be removed, it doesn't serve as a chatzitza for the tumah. So it's going to be removed. That's the b'frasta. We're talking about poisonous grass. It's like poison ivy. You're not going to give it to your animal. Okay. Poison ivy, you're not going to give it. So chazi lasa, the Bach puts in chazi, like you can use it for firewood, right? Balachim, it's wet. It's balachim if they're wet. You're not going to use it for firewood. Okay. Osha alu me'alein, or if it grew by itself, right? If it grew by itself, so you say over there, that also is a chatzitza. But the Gemara says if it grew by itself and is sitting in the wall, in this hole in the wall, kiva the kosher lakoso. Here we come to our point. That was what we talked about. We said before, the mission said that you can't plant seeds near somebody's wall because that's going to deteriorate the earth and make it, break up the earth and turn it loose, and therefore the wall won't be stable. It's keeping the kosher lakoso, since this stuff that grew up naturally and fit into the hole in the wall, it's going to be bad for the wall, right? These things are going to deteriorate the wall. Shakla, you're going to remove it. So how can you say that serves as a permanent barrier, a chatzitza, from one room to the other? It's not for food, but you're going to remove it because it's ruining the wall. We're talking about the wall over here was a wall of a ruin. The place is already ruined. The whole thing is a ruin. It's doing as she puts. They've already ruined it or whatever. It's an old ruin. It's not a wall of a stable wall in a room that you want to keep it permanent. You're afraid that the wall is going to deteriorate by these zraim. It's a ruin, so you don't care about it anywhere. Papa Rafil because he should be going to be talking about a wall of an inhabited area. Why? Talking about where it grew. Talking about it grew for the roots. where the grass grew was more than 3 tvachim away from a window, and it's just sort of hanging over. So it's not going to really do damage to the wall. It's just damage to the wall when its roots are near the wall within 3 tvachim. But here the roots of the grass, if you have, like, say, a grass or a reed or something that grew from more than 3 tvachim away from the wall and it's sort of sitting in the hole in the wall, that's not going to do damage. It's the seeds which cause the damage. That's why this whole Gemara is brought down here. But we haven't answered all the other parts. Now, tomorrow we'll pick it up from here tomorrow. The word beginning, the first word in that line is matlunius, the shmata, or the little rag. That is also a chatzit. So the Gemara is going to say, what do you mean? But it's you're gonna remove it for some other purposes. The Gemara is going to go through all these questions up through tomorrow, to Amid Beis tomorrow, to explain why each one of these items are going to remain in the wall, and therefore they're a good chatzitza. But we've hit upon this Ram, and that's why this whole thing was brought down, because this Tosfos on Amid Beis on today's Daf and Yotesem Beis, the third Tosfos says over there that the whole Shmite over here is only brought down because we're going to ask about Ram. Isn't that bad for the wall? And therefore you're going to remove it. But that's why this is all brought down. But we're really here talking about Tumas HaMes and transferring the Tumas HaMes from one room to another. We'll pick up from here tomorrow. Have a good day. Shavua Tov L'Kulam.
Is the grass really bad for the wall?
The seeds of the grass, the roots are bad for the wall, bad for the dirt.